TEFL Commute, Season 3, Episode 4, Voice, in which we talk about vocal cords, looking after your voice, and explore teachers' and students' voices in the classroom.
You're listening to the TEFL Commute podcast.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Sean. How are you doing?
Oh, it's good. It's weird. It's the first time I've not had Lindsay opposite me, so to speak. I guess we should say this is the TEFL Commute, a podcast where we talk about teaching, but not about teaching, although increasingly we seem to be talking more about teaching, and that'll confuse anybody that hasn't listened to any episode before. How are you doing, Carrie?
I'm doing good. Looking after my voice.
Are you?
No, in particular. I think, in fact, I'm doing something quite bad because I'm on my second cup of coffee.
You know what? Yeah, I got really paranoid about coffee this morning because I think probably read the same thing about you.
Yes, that too much coffee is bad for your voice, apparently, and it could be the end of our professional careers as teachers and podcasters.
Yeah, I know. Just anyway, it's a sad fact that I found out. We are talking about voice, obviously. Actually, 1 in 5 teachers apparently now miss work because of their voice.
Yes, yeah, I read that as well. And also something like 1 in 3 call centre workers or something as well.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the statistic was for how many days of work they lost a year, but obviously their voices are being used even more, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So this episode is about voice because I think both of us are very interested in the voice as teachers, podcasters, and presenters. Let's start with, we will, as you said in the intro, look at the teacher's voice and whatever, but let's talk about the voice in general, beginning. And I think you found out quite a bit about the voice, so I'll let you run the beginning part of this.
Okay, yeah, so did the usual Google stroke Wikipedia search on voice, and the first thing that comes up is kind of the anatomy of the voice, and it all seems to come down to vocal cords. That's in the larynx. Vocal cords are vocal flaps, and it's the thickness of these flaps that kind of dictates to the pitch of our voice, and it's the way that air passes through these flaps that create our voice.
So the bigger, the thicker the flaps, the lower the voice. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. That there's this kids' flaps are narrower, and they start to thicken around the age of 8, and boys' flaps will thicken more and probably reach their thickest at about 15. I think thickest for the is around 20 millimeters for a boy, and there's a range that goes from 17.5 to 25, I think it is, which is the male flap range. But a female flap is narrower, which so 17.5 would be the max for a female, which means that my voice is a higher pitch than yours does, which obviously everyone will have heard, and it's quite nice at this point that we've got kind of a male voice, female voice balancing out.
For this episode, do you like your voice? Just a question I was asking people earlier. Do you actually like? I mean, I don't like the sound of my voice. It's something. Actually, the more I've moved into the online environment, the more I've got used to my own voice. But do you actually like your own voice? Do you wish it could change?
Oh man, I don't think anyone likes their own voice when they hear it played back to them, do they? I think, I hear my voice in my head, like this ideal voice, which is so much nicer than the one that I hear in a recording. So, but as you say, you kind of get used to it, don't you? Because with so much online teaching and presenting now, when we just get used to the sound of our own voices.
I do find it fascinating. This online part is in terms of my whole career is a small amount of time than when I was fully a face-to-face teacher. But I never really paid it that much attention. I mean, obviously there are issues with voice and how I was using my voice in class, but my actual voice I never really bothered about in the face-to-face teaching. But then when I moved online, it suddenly became. I think it is. You say it's the recording aspect of it.
Do you think you've changed your voice then?
No. I see if there's anything that's changed, I'm perhaps less. I'm slightly less northern than I might be if I was in the pub with some mates.
But what about in the classroom? Did your voice not change as a teacher?
No, not particularly. I've always felt that it's well, I don't think it's for me to judge. I'm sure people who've observed me teach and stuff might say different, but I've always felt that my voice is fairly similar. I mean, one of the criticisms or one of the things I've always had with people that have observed me is the speed at which I speak. And I've always felt
surprise.
But I've always felt that was something. Well, hey, in real life, people don't particularly slow down for you. So from that aspect, I don't know. I'd have to have a much more of a reflective think about whether it's changed, but I don't particularly think so.
Yeah, I think my voice has been kind of TEFL neutered.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I think the Welsh is watered down massively, and that's partly...
when I first met you in real life and you told me you were Welsh, I never believed you because I've always got the Kerry voice. It was just like...
I know, but then words will come through every now and then in little phrases slip through. And when I was teaching little kids, primary school kids, it was great to hear them count back to me. So there I was thinking I had my neutral TEFL voice, and the little ones would count back 1, 2, 3, and I thought, oh my God, how did they pick that?
I've got exactly the same thing. When I started teaching really little ones in Greece in the early 90s, and I was teaching a class of 5 and 6 year olds, and when they'd heard me say shut the door, and when I heard them say shut door, probably in the proper northern lilt, I was like, oh, I'm so proud, And then you realise, maybe. So
they hear it more than we do.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So what do you think? Do you think students prefer a female voice or a male voice?
Oh, now there's a question I've never thought about.
I mean, we always talk about types of language, British English, American English, global English, blah blah blah. But what about voice? Do you think the female voice is a better model for teaching, or a male? Oh, the real controversial quagmire opened up in front of us.
There's this thing that this idea that I'd heard around a lot, and I hadn't really looked into it before the theme came up from this podcast, and it was that female voices are actually easier to understand than male voices. And this, so one of the examples that I'd come across kind of in real life was that, I don't know if anybody who's listening or if you, Sean, have been on the metro in Madrid, on the underground in Madrid, and they have the voices announcing the stations as they come up. And so the first chunk, which is, the next station is spoken by a male voice. And then the actual name of the station is spoken by a female voice. And that kind of seemed to chime in with this thing I'd heard about female voices being easier to understand. And I'd also been told that for coursebook writing for audio scripts and that kind of thing, that, the female voice is easier, and always, if you can, have a male and a female voice balanced, obviously because it makes it easier for students to be able to differentiate between the two people who are talking or whatever. So I looked this up. Are female voices easier to understand than males? And apparently no, not at all. It's just a complete myth.
Okay. Did the Madrid Metro do that deliberately because they thought it was easy to understand, or is it just were they looking for gender balance in their announcements?
Maybe it was more to do with politics. I have no idea, because I haven't been able to find an answer to that question. So that's like if anybody out there does know the answer to that question, it would be interesting. And then there's also this thing about the choice of a female voice for Siri. Sort of Apple's...
I never knew Siri had a female voice until, about a year after I owned an iPhone. I always thought it was male. In Britain, it seems the default voice is male, where in the States, it's the default female.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So there's one theory I'd heard was that because of... and you'll know much more about this as kind of being far more of a sci-fi expert, that because of the voice of Hal... being male, it was considered something negative. So that computers should have female voices.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. As I say, with Siri, I never realised I think it was a few years ago. It was the first time I went to a BET show, the British Educational Technology Show, and the compere of the main room is was the male voice of Siri, and I kind of sat down listening, going, I know this, I know that, and then he says, I am the male voice of Siri, and you go, and I tweeted this, and then people went, what, the voice of Siri's male? And I was like, oh wow, I didn't realise it was a female voice. I never bothered to look in settings and realised that that you could change the voice and whatever. But there's a really, if you watch Big Bang Theory, there's a really funny episode where one of the members of Big Bang Theory falls in love with the female Siri on his phone. It's well worth watching. Anyway, we're sidetracking ourselves there. So we bring it around to teachers, because obviously, I mean, for teachers, our voice is our tool, I guess, in that sense. Without our voice, we can't teach English. Agree? I presume that we would say that as a teacher, it is our most important thing, yet we probably don't look after it so well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, did you ever get any voice training in your
never.
Initial teacher training?
No, never. I mean, voice is something that came to me. I mean, I think there's two things with voice. We might look at both. I mean, there's looking after your voice, but then there's the use of our voice. I'd say, yes, I got training in the sense, and as a trainer, one of the things I think about on people on initial teacher training courses, when they stand up for the first time, or first or second time in the classroom, their voice goes. They're very monotone. They've got no expression. And actually teaching people how to use their voice as an expressive tool, yes. But looking after my voice and that kind of, then no. I would say.
Yeah. Well, I was really lucky when I was working in a school in Madrid that we actually had a trained voice trainer on the
really?
staff.
Wow.
Yeah, he was an actor before moving into TEFL, and he actually gave us sessions on both things, on how to use our voice, but also on how to protect our voice. So that was quite interesting, because I'd never thought about it at all before that.
I think that what got me into thinking about voice more, apart from the teacher, was, I think it was Alan Maley's book on the voice. I don't know if you've ever read that, which came out. It must be a good 15 years or so now ago. And that was the first time and it was called The Teacher's Voice, and it made me really think about what we do with voices and how it was going, and how we basically just don't look after them.
I was looking at that as well, and there's an interesting little exercise early on where he gives about 20 adjectives, I think it is, and you have to choose which ones suit your voice. And I just thought, I've never ever thought about that, and I couldn't decide which adjectives.
So, for example,
my voice
can you remember?
Oh, can I see? Like, there's like.
By the way, listeners, we'll put Alan Maley's book, which is well worth buying, is on One Stop English. You can download part of it, and we'll put the link on the notes. But I would recommend the whole book. I read it way back when. Sorry, adjectives.
Yeah, so there are things like, obviously, deep, soft, whingy, friendly. I can't remember, but there's about 20 of them, and each one of them I'm going like, well, am I not? I mean, sort of sing-songy, maybe, and it was those kind of questions I'd never stopped to analyse my voice.
But I also wonder how students would analyse. You look at your own voice and you think, well, I'm soft, and and the students go, no, it's whingy.
Exactly.
I like the little test at the beginning of that book. I maybe do one or two questions there. So how many of these statements are true for you? So your voice gets tired quickly. I think mine does. I'd say it does. I run out of breath when I'm speaking. They're not about me. These are things you should be saying true or false for. I get a sore throat after speaking for a long time. I need to clear my throat a lot. In fact, this is just a tick list of all the things that I know why my voice is really bad and why I don't look after it.
Any of those true for you, Sean?
Most of them.
Most of them.
Yeah. I mean, number 10 is I wish I had a more attractive voice, and we've already kind of spoken about that. So I guess the only one that really is my voice often sounds tired and dead and lacking in energy. I don't think I've ever been accused of that, but as a teacher, it might come up quite a bit. So we say we've talked about,
or maybe as a trainer, because it's quite a sensitive thing to tell someone, isn't it? Do you realise that your voice is quite boring?
Yes,
It's kind of up there with the you realise you have BO?
Yes,
personal things
you need
to point
use
out.
deodorant, and you need to change your pitch.
Yeah.
But apart from that, you're fine. Off you go.
Yeah.
So we talked about damage to the voice. Obviously, both of us have talked about coffee. Is there anything else that we should avoid as teachers, or that would help us preserve our voices?
Well, there's reading about drinking lots of water was one of them. It seemed to be also for presenters. Before you present, make sure that your voice is hydrated. So it seems that there's kind of two ways it goes. If your vocal cords are dry, then that will affect your voice and the pitch of your voice. But also, if you've got a cold, mucus, that thickens the folds and makes it more difficult as well for you to speak clearly. And it can damage if you're using the thickened folds and speaking too much with them, apparently, from my little brief anatomy lesson on Wikipedia. What else was there? I know in Portugal they swear that... Oh, okay, hold on. If you're living in Portugal, you're Portuguese, this might be wrong. This is just something that I kind of have picked up.
So it's an urban myth
so
with Chinese whisper.
There's probably a massive myth here.
That's all right. We're very good in TEFL podcast of just making up stuff and
making things up, and then that you shouldn't drink ice. Ice cold drinks, or put ice in drinks, because that will damage your voice.
Oh,
so
right.
Not too cold.
Well, I think if you start looking, and and I'm not playing this down, but if you start looking at the checklist of what you can't do, then it's like you can't drink coffee, you can't drink alcohol, you can't drink fizzy drinks, you're not supposed to have spicy meals, be careful of dairy. I mean, it's almost like one of those government lists of how to live to 100. Never mind, and I'm really not. I mean, I understand why you shouldn't do these things, but it's kind of, I guess it's if you start worrying overly, then unless you take a vow of silence, I guess, then you're not going to get...
Yeah, but I think it's kind of, the teachers' voices, yes, they're under pressure, but they're not in the same way as a singer's voice is. Sort of kind of a singer's voice probably needs to be looked after more carefully, doesn't it? And is going to be under much more strain.
But that's interesting. But I mean, just before the podcast, I was talking to James, and he did 8 hours teaching yesterday. Now, 8 hours teaching is probably a more considerable amount of work than a singer's concert. And I'm not doing either down, but I'm not sure that. I think in a certain way, perhaps.
I doubt James would have been speaking for 8 hours non-stop.
James, he loves the sound of his own voice. That's why, you've heard him on these podcasts. He talks so much. That,
yeah, I know. You just can't shut him up.
You just can't shut him. But I take your point.
Because I think a webinar is worse. I definitely feel that my voice is more tired after speaking in a webinar where the only interaction with the people that I'm speaking to is in a chat box. Then it's basically, I kind of feel like I have to keep on filling the silence with the sound of my own voice. And I'm much more tired after an hour of that than I would be after 2 or 3 hours of teaching.
That's true. I get the same after if you're in a webinar, or if you're doing a kind of plenary talk at a conference, it's where rather than a workshop where you're expected to speak for most of the hour. Then I guess. So let's just let's have a listen to some Facebook philosophy, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about how we can perhaps look after our voice, what we can do for that.
It shouldn't matter how slowly a child learns, as long as we're encouraging them not to stop. Robert John Meehan.
So, do you have any tips and suggestions for looking after the voice, apart from not drinking and living like a monk? Anything you've come across that would help there?
I think maybe recognizing when you've been speaking too much. I think possibly also having something that helps you not shout. So if you're in a large space in a classroom with a lot of background noise, or you're working with a big class of really active kids, and that you've got to find another way of kind of getting your presence across that isn't shouting. So shouting is probably the worst thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a tendency with you raise your voice at kids in a kids class to try and get order, but actually that's for many reasons, not just for the voice. That doesn't work.
Silence can often work much better, or suddenly going really quiet and serious on them. I thought that was one of my favourite tricks with the voice as well. So it's kind of, rather than, so the usual kind of more sing-songy voice, maybe suddenly just going really very serious on them like that. And they have to...
Is that your serious voice?
Very serious voice, yeah. And then they have to pay much more attention then to what is she saying, and that kind of is a trick that works sometimes. Not always. You spoke about the web. We were talking about the webinars and the plenary may maybe be tiring on a voice. Before you do one of those, do you warm your voice up? I mean, again, I guess that's an analogy to a singer. Do you do warm-up exercises? No, I've never done anything like that. No.
So again, I think this is from there are many sites on this. Alan Bailey's book about sort of suggests that you start with your face muscles. You raise one eyebrow, then you flare a nostril, then you wrinkle your nose. But I mean, we could do, if we did those on the podcast, it would be a bit dull.
It wouldn't. It would.
Then move on to your jaw. So you make chewing movements. Then in your lips, so you pout your lips. You stick your tongue out as far as possible, and all these things kind of.
Wonderful to actually do that up on the podium with the whole audience watching you, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Go back. Yeah, that would be, but not in a webinar, because you'd be on camera on your own and you'd look really, really foolish. But this kind of taking these warm up exercises, and I think it is. You might realise you look a bit daft, but before we begin, there might actually be a good way of getting ready to avoid some of that weariness. We talked about pitch and the dual teacher and stuff like that. I also came across a couple of good activities to experiment with pitch that you could do, and I actually think these would be we'll probably get finished with it in a moment, but looking at the idea of a student's voice. I mean, many of the students I taught need to stand up and do presentations and things like that, so I think what I'm about to say would cross over to be student activities. So a website gives some ideas for practicing your voice and pitch of your voice and controlling your voice. So can I experiment with you? Do you mind if I experiment? So this first activity, and I can't remember the website offhand, but I'll put it on the blog and give them proper credit. She's the writer, calls this One Note Charlie. Okay, so choose a topic.
Okay.
Got a topic?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So take a deep breath and keep talking about your topic until you run out of breath.
Okay, so I just looked around the room and saw the dog, and I thought maybe I'd talk about her, because I thought she might actually want to join in at some point, but she's decided to go to sleep instead, curled up on her little cushion in the corner, and now I'm running out of breath.
Yeah, I think it's quite a nice. It's a voice control activity. So I think actually, when I'm thinking of teaching, there's quite a nice activity for practicing things like exam speaking. You speak for a minute, this, that, and the other. But it's a good little voice activity. She does one I won't put on you. She calls Seesaw. Well, and there's a lot of debate about reading aloud, but reading aloud for practicing your voice and controlling your pitch is perhaps a useful way. And she talks about reading one sentence in a higher pitch and the second sentence in a lower pitch. And I think that's quite a nice way to get that idea to that. But I'll do what I realise we've been talking for a long time. So let's just do one more, which actually I think almost goes back to one of the exercises you picked on earlier when you were describing your voice about adjectives. Well, this one is to practice the way you use your voice, and she calls it the ham sandwich game. Okay, so the word is ham sandwich.
Okay.
And you've got, we'll pick a couple of adjectives, and you've got to say ham sandwich in that way. So, for example, if I say ham sandwich, that would be my angry voice. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I said it angrily. So the adjectives she gives are happily, sadly, lovingly, despairingly, laughingly, importantly, shyly, snidely. So pick an adjective. Let's see if we can guess what voice you do it in.
Okay. Ham sandwich.
That sounds like a handbag.
Yes, it's true.
That's almost, I don't know, is it snidely?
Yes, that's what it was.
Oh, very good. So,
okay, that worked.
That works. Yeah, so those kind of exercises I think are nice little exercises. I think, as I say, with the teachers that need to work with the voice, the ones we talked about earlier, and also this crossover to the way we use them with students. Shall we? I think we talked a lot about the teacher's voice. I mean,
can I just share one more?
Oh yeah, sorry.
So this kind of takes us off in another direction. So one of my
you mean
one of my favourite classroom activities with the students, kind of playing around with their voice, is movie trailers. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And there's this guy. You'll have heard his voice definitely, and he's called Don LaFontaine. Oh, sorry, he was Don LaFontaine. He died in 2008, and he was the movie trailer king. And he had this fantastic voice, which in fact he was one of these people who loved the sound of his own voice. And you can see an interview with him on YouTube, which I thought was fascinating. But he does this fantastic, that kind of booming movie trailer voice thing, which I'm not going to even try and imitate.
We just pause there. Let's see if we can drop his voice in.
Yes.
In a world in the year 2017,
In a time of tradition,
in a city where anything can happen, in a war that isn't his, every day in New York City, on the Miami Police Force, in the Deep South.
There you go. That makes it easy to describe, doesn't it?
Yes. Okay. So we kind of set him up as a model, and then get the students just get to play around with writing movie trailers and reading them out with a Don LaFontaine voice, and there are so many clips out there of him, and so many of these fantastic, in a world where, whatever it is, in a world where violence is king, or in a world where beauty is, I don't know.
I'm just thinking how I can incorporate that. One of my it's got to do with voice. One of my favourite kind of workshop classroom projects is, iMovie on an iPad. You can make trailers in them. They're not vocal trailers, but you can actually, they set up trailers to a theme. And now I'm thinking, wow, I can add that voice exercise to that. Wow, my brain's teaching again. So,
but it's lovely. I mean, it's great, and his voice is just wonderful. And
everybody knows that in the world.
Yeah.
You don't know anything else with it. Yeah, so that's a great idea. I'm sorry, I was going to say before we got onto movie trailers about students' voice. Because we've talked about voice, talked about the teacher's voice. We kind of, obviously some of these things are applicable to students' voice, but let's just finish by looking at some things about students' voice.
There's two things here with the voice, isn't there, I think? There's kind of, one of them, I guess, is accent. And the idea of what accent do you want in a language that you're learning? Sort of how much of your own identity do you want to keep, and how much of it do you want to lose, and how important to you is the actual voice when you're speaking? So it's kind of, in the States, there's this movement of accent reduction amongst Americans who want to reduce their I guess the regional accents in the States as well, to be a kind of a more neutral accent. And then, well, what about students? Do they want to sound more neutral? Do they want to keep their Spanish or French accent? I think there's this interesting idea of identity linked there with your accent.
Yeah, I think I've come across that. I mean, students of all types. The students are really desperate to lose that accent because they want to, in inverted commas, sound English or whatever. But I actually personally think they lose something by doing that. For me, your accent is your identity, And when I speak Czech, which is probably the language I speak best other than English, then I sound like an Englishman speaking Czech. I don't mind that.
Yeah. I think, for me too, the languages I speak, I certainly never sound native, but I just confuse people by having a mishmash of different accents kind of just being thrown into this melting pot. And I always get the, where are you from kind of response. And I think, you just want to be clear, really, is my bottom line. And I think a lot of students agree with that, but sometimes clarity means that you need to play around with voice a little bit. I think sometimes students need to hear their own voice just to see.
Yeah, and I think...
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Haha, sorry to interrupt Kerry and I talking about voice, but Lindsay's not here, and I can't pass up this opportunity to tell some more jokes. If you're a regular listener of the TEFL Commute, you know that Lindsay has never really been a fan of my jokes, whereas I quite like language play jokes and think they're a useful resource for students. So, without further ado, here are some good question and answer jokes for you. First off, why did the picture go to jail? Because it was framed. What do you give a dog with a fever? Mustard, of course, it's the best thing for a hot dog. Why should you take a pencil to bed? To draw the curtains. Why couldn't the pirate play cards? Because he was sitting on the deck. Why didn't the skeleton go to the dance? Because he had nobody to go with. What's the best day to go to the beach? Sunday, of course. Why did the boy eat his homework? Because his teacher said it was a piece of cake. Why are some fish at the bottom of the ocean? Because they dropped out of school. And to finish with, here are two plays on words that I really like from the joke site I'm stealing these from. So, what is it called when a cat wins a dog show? A catastrophe. You know, a catastrophe? Haha. And what do you call a fake noodle? An impasta. Right, I better get out of here before I'm banned from ever recording again. Back to the regular programme.
Now, back to our show.
Sometimes students need to hear their own voice just to see.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things where obviously Lindsay and I often talk about tech on these things. Technology has helped the students there. I mean, they're in a position where they can hear themselves much more easily than they were ever when you and I started teaching. So I think there's something they can do. And I think actually maybe more than accent, where I think people need to change it is related to accent, but going back to the idea of pitch and moving the stress and getting the stress timing right on words and stuff and sentences is an important aspect that students need to work on, and through that maybe they do change their accent and the way they speak, but that's through I think that's for intelligibility of the words themselves rather than...
I think there's also this thing about each language has its own voice.
Yes, that's true.
And that we can kind of imitate that voice within our own language, sort of we can all put on a in my case a really bad French accent in English or Spanish accent in English or whatever, and that's through some kind of knowledge of what the sound of the other language is, sort of, and I think it's quite fun to play around with that. And there's the position of the voice in your mouth as well. I think your face changes a little. I mean, do you speak French, Sean?
I did when I was at school.
Yeah, okay.
Me
too. It's very much school French, but there's that. If you speak French, then the sounds are further forward in your mouth than they are English, and so you kind of pout your lips a little bit, and your face changes. And I had a good friend who was bilingual Italian and French, and when speaking French, his face was completely different. He just looked different. And then speaking Italian, where the voice is kind of further back in your mouth, like basically it's the shape of the vowel sounds that makes the difference. His face was completely different. And so I think it's quite a fun thing to play with in class, that imitate, so speak your own language in an English accent and think about what does that mean, sort of what is that subtle difference in the voice,
which is kind of almost, and perhaps a good place then, which is almost taking us right back to where we're beginning, and in the fact that perhaps there needs to be more training and more thought given to the voice as teachers, because in order to make the most of those kind of exercises, then you need to understand your voice and what your voice is doing and how your voice works.
I think so, but maybe also it's quite instinctive. I mean, kind of going back to my kind of experience in Italy again, was they had the Laurel and Hardy dubbed in Italian, and the Italians are really proud of their dubbing, and they dubbed them with English accents. So they're speaking Italian, but with these amazing English accents, American accents. And the students could imitate them perfectly, absolutely perfectly. So they had this model for imitating an English-speaking accent in Italian. And so then it was quite fun then you get them speaking Italian with an English accent and then get them speaking in English, and something was transferred kind of in a subconscious way, I guess.
No, it's interesting. We've been speaking forever. I mean, maybe we should, in another season, we'll take this further and have voice too. But I think actually there's a lot come out of this that hopefully podcast listeners, if they look to the links and go back to what we said, there's actually a lot of classroom activities we've put in here. So again, as I said at the beginning, our podcast seems to be becoming more and more about teaching, even though we set out never to be. But anyway, perhaps time to draw it to an end. I guess thank you, Kerry. It's always good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun, yeah.
Certainly a pleasant change from listening to Lindsay and all these geeky sci-fi references. So thanks a lot, and we'll welcome you back to another episode in the near future.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Bye.
And bye, everyone. We'll see you next time on the TEFL Commute.
As your commute is coming to an end, here's another idea that you can use in class. We've already mentioned quite a few activities during the episode, but here's one of our favourites. Ask your students to think of 10 words that are shared in both English and their language, for example, spaghetti or tennis. Alternatively, you could dictate a list of your own. Ask them to look first at any changes in the spelling or form. For example, in Czech, the English sister becomes sestra. Then, ask them to say each word first in their language and then in English. Let them work on this on their own before you confirm the English pronunciation. Highlight any changes in word stress or changes in how consonants or vowels are pronounced. Drill the international words with an English accent, exaggerating the differences. You can find the instructions for this activity at our website, teflcommute.com. You've been listening to the TEFL Commute, an original podcast produced and presented by Lindsay Clanfield, Sean Wilden and James Taylor. Don't miss out on any episodes by subscribing to us on iTunes and by visiting us at teflcommute.com.
I wish to report a burglary.
I can't hear you, sir.
I wish to report a burglary!
That's a little bit too loud, sir. Could you say it just a little less loud than that?
I wish to report a burglary.
No, I'm still not getting anything. Could you try it and I register?
I wish to report a burglary!
Oh, that's it. Hang on a moment.